Thank you all for joining us, for inviting us today, particularly Nelson Colón and the Fundación Comunitaria, the board of the Fundación, and the staff of Revia, above all, Iram Williams and Monica Rivera, who you've all benefited from their support and service these past few days. And I know tomorrow we'll probably do something great for them, but I'd like to acknowledge their support today, right now. So please, on behalf. Nelson, I think it was about 30 years ago when we met at your office. You weren't president of the foundation yet. Doña Ethel Ríos de Betancourt, que en paz descanse, was there. And you started talking to me then. I was still living and working here in Puerto Rico about the work you guys wanted to do on racial justice and equity in Puerto Rico and the rest of the Caribbean. And we've benefited from continuing that dialogue over those 3 decades, so I appreciate that. Gracias por la invitación de regreso al patio, and particularly for fulfilling what is not your immediate mandate, which is a regional one, because you are a Puerto Rico Community Foundation, a community of, at least on the island, over 3 million people, and in the diaspora, another 2-3 million. So that's important, and it's not every organization in a community that takes time of its resources and, of course, its finances. I'm surprised that nobody's speaking today. Everybody talks resources, everything else, and all of you in the foundation world, but nobody's talking about, it's about money. It's finances, because you run an operation that has to receive money and it has to disperse money in a case like the United States with its tax system by law. In other countries, it's not like that. But anyways, thank you to the Fundación, and also to sort of take a risk, because I am not a philanthropy person. I am not a community foundation person. I'm basically somebody in business. We're actually 40 years this year. Our company started with President Carter and President Reagan's Caribbean Basin Initiative, and we've survived that and continued and prospered into markets in Latin America and in Africa. But my DNA is academic in Caribbean studies, and I did dabble at an early age over at the Ford Foundation in New York when they had a program called Education and Culture, which I think in hindsight was a euphemism then for what today is DEI, because that's where they did all the work with Charles Hamilton, who just passed last week, and did the work on Black Power movement with Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture. That's where Bill Diaz in New York started all the work with community colleges and Latinos, and of course our good friend and colleague Frank Bonilla, setting up not only the Centro de Estudios Puertorriqueños in New York, but all of that network of Latino studies universities across the United States. So in a way, I'm of the family, but I'm not in the family, so to say, but I do follow up. So my discussion stimulators for today have to do with reparations, and particularly the case of the Caribbean. When Nelson and his team asked me, I said, well, listen, what I really think is the key issue for you and your audience is that we have a missing link with Puerto Rico, and also I will throw in Dominican Republic and Cuba, which are the largest of the Antilles, not the greater Antilles, as correctly pointed out by Nelson yesterday, both in terms of physical size, but more importantly for the reparations discussion, in terms of numerical size of people of African descent who were brought over to the Caribbean forcibly into slave labor, and of course then developed these nations which we now see in the region. So first and foremost is that reparations for slavery has been in Caribbean history since the initial days of imperialism, colonialism, and then into independence and nationhood. And the argument and the discussions in these countries has always centered on the injustices of slavery and focusing on racial equity and justice. Very telling, somebody mentioned today, this is not about recrimination, because exactly that's what took place in work done over 200 years ago, both in the empire and in the colonies, not about recriminating against the slave masters or the empire, but about doing justice to the damage and the hurt that was done, which, as you have discussed in many other senses, was structural and institutional in addition to personal and individual. And the historiography reminds us of that, because that claim for reparations goes back way to the period of colony, and even when slavery was abolished in the 3 decades of 1834 and 1868, it continued, and it's continued today. In the case of Haiti, which Paul will tell us about, it's what I call reverse reparation, because Haiti was forced to pay to the slave masters the supposed loss in property that came with the revolution and the liberation of slavery. And in that case, it's been hamstrung by that for over 200 years. And similarly, those of you may have noticed that just in 2015 was the year after 8 decades that British taxpayers completed the payment of the debt to slave owners of 20 million pounds that was paid to them to free the 800,000 slaves in the English colonies, equivalent to about 300 million pounds today, but that was financed by the government of Britain, by its taxpayers, and it only ended up paying the interest on that loan to pay that off in 2015. So we're talking about impressive figures. In the case at the regional, hemispheric, and international level, both Pastor and Epsi has already mentioned, I know she'll speak about it tomorrow, we've got the initiatives at the UN, at the OAS, and particularly now seeing more initiatives in terms of Latin America, where it's been a quiet movement, with the exception, as was mentioned this morning, of Brazil. But what I call the star of the team is what the Caribbean community has done and materialized in 2014 with the creation of an institution, something all of you spoke about today, the CARICOM Reparations Commission, which is research, advocacy, policy from all sectors in society, governments, private sector, education, business, media, a complete organizational, institutional structure to tackle the challenge of reparations against, in this specific case, the United Kingdom, at the level of law and policy. So we're talking about lawsuits, and we're talking about policy changes in the relationship between the former empire and the former colonies. And of course, some of you would have seen a few years ago, Barbados had a vote and declared itself a republic. So that means that its head of state, which is still nominal, but it makes a lot of sense, is no longer, in that case, the Queen of England or the King of England. It's a president of Barbados. And other countries are in those discussions as well. And we will share with the folks by email, but there's an excellent document, we have it for you, which is the CARICOM 10-point plan for reparatory justice. And this is the commitment of governments, the business community, everybody in that space in terms of what is going to be the action, not just for reparations, but then what is our plan to reverse the 200 plus years of underdevelopment with these new resources in terms of making justice there. And in addition, we'll also share, just last year, to give you a sense of the scope of the work that needs to be done, a report in the announcement took place in Jamaica, August 18th last year, which is the study on the quantification of reparations for transatlantic chattel slavery in the Americas and the Caribbean, resulting in a bill of trillions of dollars owed by European former empires to Caribbean nations. It was launched in Kingston, Jamaica. It covers 31 countries. You'll receive the information. I know my Jamaican colleagues over there know all about it because they were there ever since from 1838. But what's important to me and for all of us to have a sense is that this is now talking, and I know there's many lawyers in the group, this is forensic legal analysis of what slavery was in terms of a business, what the compensation ought to be as a result of a business that destroyed populations that were brought over only to be exploited property. I'm a person in business. I'm always fascinated. In this case, I think everybody has noticed there's a large concentration of California foundations. I've always been fascinated, the westward movement, the ingenuity of American capitalism, how it went west, the exploitation that took place, but then the ingenuity, the innovation that has taken place in the West Coast. But I always tell my business friends, you know, any donkey would have been able to make things happen when 70% of your business costs are free.
Yeah.
Now, these weren't donkeys, mind you. These were very sharp people, prepared and so on, like all of us. But it does help out when a good chunk of your operating costs are free. So we need to keep that into perspective. But just to give you a few numbers so you can get a sense on the forensic analysis done. Britain would owe 14 countries in the Caribbean $24 trillion. Spain, a missing link I'll mention now briefly, would be $17 trillion. They even went to do the study of the United States, although the commission is only on the Caribbean. And in the case of the United States, for the 100 years of slavery, and of course we've discussed that even after emancipation, life continued to be pretty much still like slavery, that's a total of $26 trillion. And then let's not forget our friends in France and Portugal and the Netherlands. For the French, it would be about $9 trillion. Portugal, remember, they had the jewel of the crown in terms of size. And no, it was not the United States, the largest country with African people being brought over. It was Brazil.
Yeah.
And that bill for Brazil is $20 trillion. And then the Netherlands, which has always sort of prided itself that, well, all we did was finance business. We never really had many colonies and so on. Well, their bill is a whopping $3 trillion anyways. So we're talking of over $107 trillion in forensic analysis by lawyers, accountants, historians, people in the medical community, because we can actually now say the negative health damages done to people of African descent throughout the Caribbean amounted to so much. Let me know when I've got 2 minutes.
Keep going.
Okay? So just because I want to be aware of that. But I wanted to let you know that. That's not my information. I'm not part of that study group. But just to let you know the organizational, institutional requirements that we need to put in place if we want to be serious and successful about a reparations claim in any framework. And I think, as has been the case throughout history, the small islands in the Caribbean have now set an example that can be followed because it is structured, organized, institutionalized in law and in policy. So it covers the entire spectrum. It doesn't mean that everybody in CARICOM is in full agreement. What it means is that there was enough agreement that we now have this plan since 2014 and it is now being executed. What does that mean for our patio here in Puerto Rico? Well, one of the things is that Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Cuba, even in the case of Haiti, which ideologically has always been our most advanced Afrocentric country in the region, despite all its political and institutional problems, we do not have formally established, organizationally institutionalized reparations organizations doing this work and taking it forward. We do have plenty of organizations doing the claim of the injustice of white supremacist racism against Afrocentric populations and cultures in all the countries. We have not taken it yet to that next level. So one of the points for discussion is that there you go and there's an initiative. And a key point as I close out, and we can do discussion later, is one of the elements is what I call the myth of the Spanish national unity in the countries of Latino empire, which is that instead of the British model, which we call the binomial race-color segregation, you're either white or you're black, and that's it. The Spanish, the French, the Portuguese, they have this notion, no, your national identity is we're all una gran familia. And therefore, with that myth, you eliminate, guess what? Racism.
Yeah.
Because if we're all una gran familia, no, we don't have racism because we're all mixed and we're happily mixed. And therefore, we can't have racism, we can't have racial injustice because todos somos iguales. And that is an element which is going to be very different in a reparations argument in these countries from the one, for example, that we had in CARICOM, where it was the strict Anglo sense of, You're not white, you're not plantocracy, you were black, you were a slave, and the distinction that made. Very much, as many of you know, the case in the United States as well. So let me stop there. That's my contribution in terms of that missing link. I know many of you are thinking of programming in Puerto Rico related to racial justice, related to people of African descent, and I think that would be an element where something has been planted in the Caribbean. You've got a missing link with at least one larger island and maybe some others. So
Wonderful.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Am I all right?
Yes.
Good. I really start my speech giving thanks. Can you hear? Mm-hmm. Yes. Nelson, thanks for inviting me. I owe some thanks to David because he did some of the groundwork. There are many things I don't have to repeat because he did it already. But I have a special thanks to give to somebody I heard today for the first time, and I'm thinking about Mrs. Blackwell. She said two things. She said many things, but she said two things I particularly like and I will be using in what I'm saying here. I'll get to it. But anyhow, somebody here this morning spoke about the importance of facts and the importance of storytelling. I will be proposing you some facts so that you can feed the storytelling with respect to Haiti. Slavery as a business, this is very true. And codified by law in the case of Haiti. And not by anybody. Louis XIV, le roi soleil, very important monarch in France of the 18th century, le siècle des Lumières, the century for revolutionary France, codified what we called le Code Noir, the Black Code. This is 1724. Louis XIV codified, made a law as to how to deal with slaves and how to conduct the work in the fields of the sugarcane fields, the coffee fields, and so forth, so that there is a law to do punishment to black slaves that don't do the things the way they are. 1724. I think I would give you that information. But you know, after a century and a half of French very hard labor to the African borders, producing up to 50% of export to France, and the slave in the hands of French elites, not any French elites in Haiti. And came in 1791 the first big and successful slave revolt. 1791. Now that comes within the context of the hardship of slavery during a century and a half, plus the ideas of revolution, liberté, égalité, fraternité, being talked about in France since 1789, and some of the words get into the colony, and both things together produce the big revolt in the colony of Saint-Domingue. But I'll tell you something. This is something that you should always know. The reaction of the United States within that circumstances. And not under the leadership of anybody. It was under the leadership of the Secretary of State at that time, who is nobody else but Thomas Jefferson. Mm-hmm. Secretary of State in 1791. The United States, it was at that time, during that year, that the United States proclaimed the Second Amendment to the Constitution. You all know what the Second Amendment is about. It is about the bearing of arms amendment coming within that year raised the suspicion, the fear of the white man in the United States to allow arm bearings so that they can kill whatever slave they need to kill when they need to kill. Please take note of that for your solitary. I would like also to mention 1801, because you see, between the revolt and the coming of the French Revolution into power, and the French Revolution into power sending some of its commissioners to the colony to see how they can harmonize things, came also a leadership among the slaves, the leadership of Toussaint Louverture, who did the work both in the civilian population as well as the military, because he became part of a French soldier in the French army, raised up to the title of general, and when he came general, he insisted, we need freedom. And he was able to move things in such a way that he got the control of the entire island, not just the western part, the entire island. And he proclaimed his own constitution in 1801, declaring the abolition of slavery over the entire island. But that was too much for Napoleon, because Napoleon, when he came, it is the counter-revolution. Napoleon sent in 1802 an army of 30,000 people to retake control. And they happened to have done that, to have arrested Toussaint Louverture and expulsed him to France, where he died a year later. And closely after, soon after, Napoleon declared the reinstallment of slavery in Guadeloupe and Martinique, and that helped the Haitians, former slaves or former freemen, whatever you want to call it, to get together in 1803, create a flag, and fighting for the revolution, the true revolution. It took them about 6 months or 7 months from the 18th of May, 1803 to the November 18, 1803, to militarily destroy the army that Napoleon had sent to Haiti. This, we must know it. The Haitians earned independence by fighting against the biggest army of that time, that of Napoleon, and won over it. 2 months after, Haiti declared its independence. But I'll tell you something more. Napoleon, with his dream of a big Atlantic colony in the Americas, he was forced to sell the Louisiana. And by the way, Louisiana purchased, it's not just the Louisiana of today. The Louisiana of that time went almost all the way up to the Great Lakes. And in that way, the United States was able to double its size. And who did the purchase? Again, Thomas Jefferson, this time as President of the United States. Those things, I wanted to pinpoint them so that you can have the data to put up on your history, so that it's not only France, the United States is very much part of what happened in what happened to the black man on a global way. Now, let me say something. You know, what's the size of that? The Haitians had to pay reparation In 1825, France sent a flotilla, an army, an armada, for me to recognize your independence, you must pay reparation. And the Haitians, seeing a flotilla of 30 boats in the Bay of Port-au-Prince, they agreed to pay 150 million francs or. There has been many calculations of what that meant. Most calculations, they say in today's money, it's between 20 and 30 billion dollars. I'm talking about only the debt in reparation, not anything else included. And if I were to take the estimation of one of the most important French economists, I'm thinking of Thomas Piketty. His estimation is $28 billion. Of course, we haven't received anything, but to give you the size of what that meant. But in between, we lost the 19th century economic development because there was no financial means to be able to finance investment, because the state of Haiti sometimes had to use over 40% of public income, of state income, to pay interest and capital to France. Haiti finished paying that debt in 1952. So I think the case of reparation is well stated. I don't think I need to talk more about it. I only want to give you some data and some depth so that you can feed your storytelling to America, to Black America, because I think if we can be solidaire, the solidarity along those topics, I think we can go very far in the next decades. Haiti today is a country pretty much destroyed in the hand of gangs for different reasons, the lack of development coming from without, but the lack of development from within also. And that's why, I'm thinking of Mrs. Blackwell when he said two things. It's not only to get ready, it's to stay ready. I think if it took only 2 years following the French Revolution starting July 14, 1789, if it took only 2 years for the slave revolt, that this was because they were staying ready. They were not staying ready. And in the case of how Haitians do how they manage the state, the kind of governance they have, where the Haitian elite, black or mulatto or whatever it is, what they have done really, they have kept backward 80% of the population. Those who were slaves in the fields, they were paying the income taxes, they were paying the sales taxes, but they didn't get no services. They didn't get educational services, they didn't get health services, and those are the people today, in my opinion, who are in revolt, doing things difficult to digest, but Haiti now is in revolt in the hands of gang. This is more complicated than what I'm saying because the gangs are also participating into the marketing of drugs coming from South American producing countries en route to the North American buying countries and the West European buying countries, and going also, Haiti is there because the lack of surveillance of the coastline of Haiti. And if you take a look at the form of the coasts, Haiti has thousands of kilometers of coasts not well surveilled, and the United Nations have said there are at least 12 landing fields for small planes to discharge cocaine en route to the United States, en route to Western Europe. And those narcotics travel quite freely through a border with the Dominican Republic, from which many planes take off every day in function of the big tourism industry flourishing on the eastern part of the country.
Thank you, Paul.
So this is what it is. I'm stopping here. Thank you.
First, I want to thank Nelson for your courage in launching this really important conversation. Can't say enough about Susan for the leadership. She continues to demonstrate moving conversations about racial equity, not just in the upper 48 or 50, but also throughout the diaspora. Paul and David, I think, did a great job with sort of using sort of federal lens on the issue of reparations. I think there's also a conversation around philanthropic reparations that needs to be lifted up also, and for the lack of recognition of U.S. colonies as important places for investment and repair. One of the things that is distinctive about the place that I represent was not included on, well, actually the island of St. Croix has actually been colonized by 7 empires, one of which is the longest was Denmark, which is considered one of the happiest places in the world, partly because of the incredible yields that they benefited from slavery in the U.S. Virgin Islands. St. Croix is actually really interesting in this conversation as well, and has a lot in common with our sisters and brothers in Haiti, as one of the few places that fought for and won emancipation. And did so, I think, 15 years before the Emancipation Proclamation on the U.S. mainland. My organization is, I think, reflective of a spirit of rebellion and revolution in that we look different, we serve differently as a place-based foundation that's doing really deep social change and community development work in the Virgin Islands. And one of the things that I hope that those in the room in the field of philanthropy walk away from this time together with is the recognition that we can no longer use the tools of the colonizer and the oppressors that built the plantations we live on today in philanthropy to create the castles that we envision for our people in the future. And so one of the things that we've done, and I think we've done really well in the Virgin Islands, and particularly at the organization that I lead, is that I fundamentally believe that relationship is the revolution. And I cannot be effective as a leader in philanthropy if I believe I lead from in front. And so one of the things I do is I go nowhere alone. And Nelson, you and I have had this conversation. We spent the last 7 years building a consortium of civic leaders, of nonprofits that are doing the deep work that I think all of us want to see in our communities. And I think one of the things that philanthropy has to get better at is that we seek to invest in social change without committing to building systems of change within the field first. And so I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to yield to my thought leader, who I don't go anywhere without, because she's the one on the ground doing the work. And I could sit up here and sort of have my name in lights, but really, I am nothing without my nonprofits. And I know earlier Mr. Bell talked about the 5-legged stool. In the Virgin Islands, I believe it's 4, because I make no distinction between my organization as a philanthropic organization and the nonprofits that I work very intimately with. And so I'm going to yield to my thought leader, Dr. Chen, to talk about the work that she has been on the leading edge of around the issues of reparations. And I am very proud to be from an island that launched the conversation about reparations in 2004, long before many other places, including CARICOM, led that conversation. And so I am very, very privileged to be sitting here with my thought leader.
Greetings. I think this is working.
Yep.
Is it working?
Yes.
Great. First and foremost, I'm going to say Bayete. We can say it together. Bayete. And it's just a royal greeting. So that what we're talking about in terms of what happens on the ground, and I'm so grateful that everyone has covered my first 10 points. So that way I can go. I'm very grateful. I thought I had to say a significant amount, and I'll be on time to the best of my ability.
You're good.
But I'm very grateful because in this space here in Puerto Rico and Borican space, we definitely need to give some acknowledgement to Atabe. It's really important that we recognize where we are in this physical space. And we call on all of those ancestors, although that will happen later, because when we talk about reparatory justice, restitution, reparation, repatriation, which many of them are linked, this is a discourse that becomes somewhat difficult because some persons don't wish to have that conversation. They're not comfortable seeing the visuals. And we're talking about visuals that are ancestral, yes, things that happened in the 1700s and before that, but we still have some issues that are happening right now. So I speak to you from a space of being part of the nonprofit consortium of the St. Croix Foundation for Community Development. And this sister here, I need us to take a second and acknowledge her because she's been so bold to the point that some people aren't really comfortable when she comes in the room because she says the truth. And smiles just about like that, yeah. So I would like to just highlight that some of the areas around reparations, and I should share that. I sit inside of the CARICOM Reparations Commission in a very unique space because the Virgin Islands is a non-incorporated, non-self-governing territory of America, right? And our real name is Virgin Islands of the United States. USVI just sounds more touristy, right? I sit in that space through the Caribbean Pan-African Network, and a lot of persons aren't familiar with the representation that we have within CPAN from as many of the Caribbean Isles as is possible. So it comes through a lens of a very Pan-African, African fundamentalist space, right? So it's very inclusive. So when we talk about reparations and reparatory justice in that space, we're also incorporating many of the organizations' orders that are not usually in this room. Rastafari has been centripetal to anything dealing with reparations for a long, 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 long time. And sometimes when we're giving that narrative, we forget that. There are African revolutionary organizations that are pretty much so attacked and ostracized, they get no funding from anywhere outside of the sweat of their own brow, doing things around agriculture, agribusiness, agritourism. Notice where I'm going, because it's always grounded in land and sovereignty. I think it's also important to recognize that when we're speaking of the CPAN, also that sits within the CARICOM Reparations Commission. This 10-point plan is recently, as a week and a half ago, there was a retreat in Jamaica at the UWI Mona campus, facilitated by the chair, Dr. Sir Hilary Beckles. I know him also as Chief Asiko of IDO, and I want to make sure that I highlight that through his leadership, thought leadership in action, because thought leaders are awesome. Thought leadership with actionable deliverables is a little bit extra, and it requires another layer of commitment and work and dedication, right? That has now created another layer. The 10-point plan might become a 12-point plan because things have changed from 2013 to now. And there's a wider space so that yes, it's about what transpired to persons of African ancestry. Yes, it has to include what happened to indigenous ancestors in these spaces. And yes, it has to include some of these other communities that have been marginalized on a similar scope. So I just needed to make sure that that was highlighted as well. My next point is that there are a number of ancestors and living elders and eldresses that tend not to be in this space of being comfortable talking about reparatory justice, because it becomes reparations, yes, and it's not just money anymore. In the 20th century, reparations was about the dollars, and I love that you already gave the figures in the trillions. But it's going to be, you cannot pay me for what was done to my ancestors. There's no dollar, no English sterling, not even gold or platinum that can pay for that. So there has to be a restorative relationship that is resource-based, that is land and sovereignty-based, that is around power, authority, and that respect for our humanity. And again, we've been hearing that term, shared humanity, so I'm just veggie backing on that. You could tell I'm vegan, right? So the other part that I'd like to highlight, and Sister Deanna was very clear on highlighting that. In the Virgin Islands, this whole discussion, dialogue, conversation around reparatory justice has its roots as early as the late 1800s with a brother, Reverend Dr. Edward Wilmot Blyden, right in St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands. Hubert Harrison, right inside of St. Croix. I just would like people to get, so then it kind of grew into Casely Hayford in Ghana, persons like Marcus Garvey, of course. By the way, yes, in Jamaica, took it global, so there's still that grounding of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. People don't tend to speak of that in that context when we're talking about reparations, restitution, repatriation, because they're linked, right? And there's something that needs to be said in that regard. My second to last point is that inside of the Virgin Islands, it was in 1733 that there was an African revolution. People like to call it a rebellion and a riot. These Africans came off the ships and it took a sister, Queen Brefu. They took her 2 children. And this is documented, you don't have to believe me. You can look in the archive, and the Danes have actually put that in their very eloquent resource database now. It's translated in English. And she led a revolution that started November 23rd, 1733, that held the island of St. John as a liberated, clear African territory for 7 months before other forces were brought in from other islands other forces were brought in, and it was from the same islands that were governed by the Spanish, the French, the Dutch, and we can go on, right? 1878 in St. Croix, people were tired of labor inequities. Another woman, Queen Mary Thomas, let a fire burn. Again, people always speak of October 1st. Bear them till October come, because it was a contract day. But the bottom line is that many persons lost their lives to uphold their rights for labor. I just need for us to get the context of what happened in these little tree islands, right? That people like to speak of, you know, we don't have 1 million people, you're right. We're struggling to keep 100,000. And the 100,000 that we tend to keep are not from their giving back to there. So that's the other reason why the role of philanthropic foundations and organizations becomes centripetal to offering this layer of support to these small island communities. 1892, St. Thomas, I don't want to leave anybody out. First successful non-violent protest, because they already knew what happened with the hundreds of people that are still buried underneath asphalt in St. Croix from the fire burn. And they had a one-day labor protest. They said they want fair wages for their work. The Mexican silver dollar had no value. And it shifted things. So when we speak of reparations in the Virgin Islands, we're doing it through a lens of having to leverage ourselves with our partners, our fellow neighbors, if you will, our family in the wider Caribbean, in Central and South America. There's a lot of persons from Panama, Costa Rica, even El Salvador, Nicaragua, right inside of the Virgin Islands. They tend to have their own association and still work with us. There's no divisiveness to the best of our ability. You can speak Spanish, Dutch, French, Papiamento, Portuguese, and English, Haitian Creole. I'm just saying, all these languages you're going to find in that space. So when we're speaking of these things, this is what lent to my last point. So last year, February, in Jamaica, at the UE, there was a Reparations and Healing convening. It brought African royals to come and address that myth of the role of African kingdoms in enslavement, so that we could stop telling that incorrect narrative. Nobody comes in your house, rape your children, rape your mother, rape your father, and you just, here, take the rest. You don't do that. But if it looks like they're going to annihilate your entire ethnic group, everybody in your village, you're going to navigate some type of something because you want to live. And it was excellent to hear that come from these African royals that brought that truth, and with scholars that added to that truth, and community scholars, and I need to highlight that. Not everybody's going to do the PhD, LLM. Most persons aren't that crazy to keep doing that, right? Yes, I will. Thank you. Just saying, you know, but we have some serious cultural stewards, some very serious community scholars and thought leaders that, again, you're going to hear my hashtag, actionable deliverables, that are doing this layer of work. My closing point is just that there were also the reparations study tour that my colleague here was shared so eloquently. What came out of that? All of these papers are public. That's where we need the philanthropy piece to help us, because there were foundations that supported that and flew people all over the planet to be able to come and convene. But it needs to be the convening, yes, but then it needs to be, what are we going to do after this session so that we can actually shift what's going on in our respective communities, right? Because even what we did last November in Ghana, this Accra Reparations Conference, there were things that happened in the room between the African Union, ECOSOC, and I'm going to say it so I don't forget, because it was the Institute of the Black World, the National African American Reparations Commission, as well as commissions out of CARICOM. There was representation from Central and South America. There was representation from Canada. And I'm saying it, and it needs to be said. We have to do this thing together. Reparations has no purpose, no foundation, no future if we do not do this together.
Okay, so this is where we're going to keep this conversation going.
Yes, give thanks.
I love it. So what does it look like to do it together? I'm going to ask each of you that question, and then I want to make sure we have questions from the audience. Okay, what does it look like to do it together, and how do we leverage philanthropy to do that so that it is not siloed? All right? So I feel like you've already answered that question. Do you have 30 seconds you'd like to add, or do you want me to?
I just encourage, yes, I would just encourage persons to look at some of those outcomes. You know, rapporteurs have a way of only putting what was really important to them, and there were some things that were not in those reports that persons have posted in social media, like even convenings like this. Whatever comes from this, it's important to put it in social media, to put that public version, so that the younger people, the persons that are under 35, can be the succession planners, so that they become the thought leaders, that we are doing this appropriately, and that they are funded. I'm going to say it very directly, that they do not feel that volunteerism is a sin, that they are properly funded.
Deanna.
So I continue to hone in on place and the power of place, and you know, our field has a tendency to be schizophrenic. The reason that Dr. Chen is here is because this is her life, this is her work. She doesn't have the luxury of going back to home base and looking away from this. And so for me, I think one of the things that we can do as a field is to make sure that the Dr. Chens of all the places where this conversation is important and necessary are sitting at the table.
Yeah. So it's the proximity
It's
again.
proximity. It
It's the
absolutely is
proximity again. David?
In business economics, we now have an industry of about 3 decades focused on, simply put, institutions matter. And that you can probably go all over the world and look at failures and success, and you're going to find one common denominator: institutions that work and function or do not work or function. So in this sense, working together, what it means is that you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Sir Hillary and Professor Shepard and all those people at the university, they did not reinvent the wheel because they had an institution that was functional with their university. What they needed to do was link all these different people that up to them were working independently and separately, but not with one organizational focus. And that exists here in Puerto Rico. You've got a lot of institutions that are doing this haphazardly. We need to sort of tie that together in someone mentioned yesterday, I think, or this morning, the operational aspect of grant making and projects. It's not just the good idea, the good scope, but okay, how do we get that done in 18 months, in 36 months, in 60 months? Because at the end of the day, you need that deliverable. So using that and bringing it together, and in some cases, maybe you do need to start something new, but there's enough there already to tie it together.
Yeah. And I think the other point you're making is that in philanthropy, we tend to fund things in silos, or we don't often know what's happening in other parts. And so events like this, where it brings everyone together, is also an opportunity for philanthropy to think, how do we fund in coalitions, or how do we fund collaboratives?
There is a big need to bring people together in Haiti and to build institutions in Haiti. And Haitians within Haiti even don't want the Haitians from the diaspora to come in. What's going on? They believe the diaspora, people from the diaspora will come to be competitors. Yeah. My goodness, they can help. So in Haiti, there is a lot of work to be done in the field of community building. A lot of work to be done.
Fabulous. Let's open it up for a couple questions. Saul?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I'm certainly not a content expert anywhere on near the level here, but I am, in Evanston, Illinois, the first city in the United States to pass a municipal reparations program, Community Foundation. Were you in Evanston in December?
Not December.
Oh, yeah, so we have I also want to invite anyone who's interested. Every December, we have a reparations symposium, bringing together reparations leaders from around the globe. So please join us. Usually in December, go to firstrepair.org if you want to check that out. Or you can email me at anderson@evanstonforever.org, and I'll make sure you get on the invite list. But I just wanted to share that this, first of all, just so glad to see so many folks working across the globe doing this great work. You know, Evanston's Reparations is around redlining, which I think introduces a lot of complexity that many of you have talked about, because during the time period of redlining, there were not only African Americans and descendants of slaves, but Evanston has a significant Haitian population, Jamaican population, even Belizean folks, who are all impacted by this racist legacy, right? Like Jim Crow and all these other policies that impacted the lives of those folks. And so it's sort of created a really interesting debate. And you talked about so much about how many, you know, France backing up Denmark in holding down, you know, slave rebellions and revolutions, excuse me, and all of that. And there's so much debate in the U.S. about what reparations is, and many folks feel like it's just about slavery. It's, you know, there's certainly room to hold that ideal, but there's so much that happened since that we're kind of wrestling with in Evanston a little bit, and I'm just excited to see there's so much thinking going on around this across, really around the world, because, you know, we're just a tiny little town of 75,000 people, and we're, you know, it's tough to figure it out just within that group, especially with so many multi-generational families and all this sort of stuff kind of going back. But I just wanted to add that to the conversation.
Yeah.
That there's some stuff going on in the U.S. as well, and there's so much popping up, and I know there's great work going on in California, there's stuff coming out of North Carolina, even my home state of Michigan has got some things popping up, and it's going to require us to all work together as a global diaspora to understand that we're facing so many of the same things. And so I just wanted to add that from the sort of continental, the upper 50, I think.
But I'm going to stop there and say, I think the point you're making is the point that has been already made, right? That slavery hasn't stopped. It's just taking on different forms. And so as we're thinking of reparations, how do we address the harm of the past and the harm of the current? And then the point you made, right? Like, you can't pay me enough for the damage that you've made. I think it's important to lift up a couple of things. Number one is, the first economy of the New World was slavery, right? And that it's been documented, and there's a way to at least try to figure out numerically how to make some reparations. And then the question for Haiti, right? How dare they ask Haitians to pay for their own enslavement? Like, that's, and is there a world response to that?
Let me add a point there, because one of the missing links, which is no longer missing since the whole trajectory of Caribbean reparations engagement, has been the convincing and recruitment of not just the institutions, but the people, the families in the empire that lived off slavery, who are now having their own catharsis and coming forth and saying, yes, we acknowledge that privilege, and we have a responsibility, and this has happened. We've seen it in Antigua, in Grenada, universities now in Britain, in addition to the ones we know of in the US. That was part of also the same research and education process. When 50, 60 years ago, somebody's saying, oh, this family benefited, wow, that was like almost illegal to say that. As you build that research over the years and you explain, I'm not about putting you on the spot and saying you now, no, I'm about let's bring you in because you're a missing link in this discussion. And that's a big part of what the Reparations Commission in CARICOM has done, because otherwise we're just preaching to the choir. We need those on that side if you think you're going to get anywhere in Britain or in France or in Netherlands or in Spain, where there's not even a discussion that the Spanish Empire was the largest empire in the world and brought all this slavery to us in the beginning. There's not one institutional, organizational discussion about that yet. So that work needs to be done, and you need to bring that in. And a lot of it starts, as you're saying about Evanston, at the community level, because that's how you build it up into the political system.
Yeah.
If I may, in Spain, as quiet as it's kept, we have persons like Dr. Abuye.
Oh, yeah.
Right, who's at least trying to bring the conversation up. But again, if we don't have the support and persons don't know, then it just becomes like dust in the wind, right? So it's really important that persons begin to share that. There's things that have been mentioned that are happening in Belize. There's things that are happening in Suriname. There's things that are happening in Guyana. You know, French Guiana, people forget about French Guiana, and they actually have aligned themselves with the situation in Haiti, with the situation in St. Martin. And when they say St. Martin, they're thinking of one St. Martin. They no longer identify like French and Dutch by the colonizers. I think it's really critical that that's the part that comes out when you start to see all of the countries inside of the African continent now supporting global reparations. That's major for the African Union to engage in that kind of responsibility and not absolve themselves of any engagement, but to be very specific and intentional on what that looks like and how we do this work moving forward so that we can, again, I say it because I like having persons under 35 years in the room because they're the ones, they know how to let everybody in the earth know in 5 minutes everything that happened in the room, right? Just wanted to share that.
So there's a lot more we could say. Gosh, I know, I see hands up. I see hands up, and I'm at time. And I want to respect that this conversation isn't over. Is that right? Okay. I don't know what that means for time, but we're going to respect that this conversation isn't over. Let's give it a little more time. The other thing I'm hearing, I think you just blew my mind, David, with something you said earlier on, which I'd never thought about being Afro-Latina. There's this conversation about we are all one familia. And this whole narrative about being one familia negates the fact that they were oppressors and oppressed, right? Within the Spanish colony and within this, within Spain. And so one way in which we talk about building solidarity is maybe busting that myth, that myth has not served Afro-Latinos well. Can you say just a little more about that? And then we are going to take some more questions, or anyone.
Well, I would say in the case of Spain, it's not the question only of Afro-Latino. It is also the case of the indigenous people.
Yes. Say
I
more.
mean,
Go
Latin
for it.
America, it's an Indian country. And I'll tell you more. The Indian cause is less advanced than the Afro cause. At least we are meeting and we're talking about it in an open society. I don't think it is so with the Indian cause, and they need it.
Yeah.
Well, the King of Spain and the government of Spain, as progressive as it says it is, denied the Mexican president's letter 3 years ago where he said we need to sit down to discuss reparations because, what happened in 1492 was not a discovery. It was not an encounter of two worlds. It was, plain out, savagery and destruction, and we need to discuss that. And they won't even put it on the agenda. So even when we in the English-speaking Caribbean chastise the English, at least in Britain we've advanced so far that you now have people in the power structure in the United Kingdom saying, yes, we need to do this. If you're expecting the king to come out and do something, well, take your time.
Yeah.
But the people in the power structure at least tell us, no, it's being discussed because we know we can't hide away from that anymore because you have made the case now. And this is, I'm not a lawyer fan, but the key aspect of the Robinson Commission is you now have a legal case based on Western jurisprudence. What you established in the world, this is what we've done now. According to your rules, the way you say things have to be done, we now can prove to you you caused destruction, damage, and you need to now compensate.
Yeah, love it.
If I may.
I see your hand has been up for a while.
Right.
Go ahead, ma'am. Tell us your name and what organization or where you're from.
Good afternoon, everyone. Maria Moloney, from Afrodescendencia Justice Collaborative. We're trying to hear.
Yep, here we go.
Focuses on bringing racial
It's possible. They need to hear me because they're,
Okay, hold on.
they're recording.
Start all over, ma'am.
So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mariama Williams. I'm with the Global Afrodescendent Climate Justice Collaborative, which is a fairly new collaborative looking to bring race and racism within the climate governance. UNFCCC, we have a resolution on racism. I don't know if people are aware that for the first time in its 30-year history, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that informs the UNFCCC negotiation has identified colonialism as a driver of climate change. Yes. Mm-hmm. So we have that on the record. That's not why I'm raising my hand. I just want to identify myself. But I wanted to put something out around the Haitian revolution and the implications of it, because I think we have a lot of work to do within the Caribbean on internalized oppression, on the fact that the powers that be in the Caribbean have not really taken responsibility for the wealth they've generated from the black people in the Caribbean. And so that's not part of what you may say the UK people are doing it, but in the Caribbean, I don't know any family that has taken responsibility and accountability for their wealth coming from slavery and so forth. But I think for Haiti, I think we need to understand the full implication of what Haiti did and why it's still suffering, right? Yeah. Haiti contributed to the American War of Independence, as well as the Mexican Revolution. The Mexican Revolutionary came to Haiti when the first president was in power to also look at what they had done. And if you go to Panama, beyond going to the canal, there's a museum where there's a climate control room that shows you the letters between the Haitian revolutionary and the Bolivarians. And remember, Bolivarian revolution included Panama, Colombia, Peru, as well as other places. And that letter between them, back and forth, where the Haitians were giving them strategic advice as to what to do. So it's not just the US, Spain also is culpable for wanting to keep Haiti down because of the Mexican Revolution, because of the Bolivarians. So Haiti did a lot. People aren't really cognizant of what Haiti represents and why it is still suffering. And I think we need to be really, really grounded in that reality. Yeah? Thank you.
Others?
Mary?
Right here in the back.
Thank you, Dr. Grace Lubwama, President and CEO of Kalamazoo Community Foundation, originally born and raised in Uganda, so happy to be here. I don't know if this is the right place to ask this question, but it's been bothering me. As descendants from Africa, spirituality is important to us. And from an economic perspective, religion has played a huge dynamics in racism. I want to hear from the panel, what that looks like.
Wonderful.
And
question.
Especially as people of color, we are very spiritual, and religion means something.
Okay.
But it's been very key to playing in global racism.
Let's hear. Go ahead, Paul.
Well, in the case of the Haitian revolt, the slave rebellions, and the revolution that followed, religion played a very important role. Voodoo played a very important role.
When it's your turn.
There is no doubt about it. No doubt about it. It is also by using African spirituality and African techniques that we were able to overcome the French army. There is no doubt about it.
Fabulous. Anyone else want to speak to that?
I think you're right on target on our indigenous in-region privileged beneficiaries. And this is something the CARICOM Commission has discussed and in every country and recognized. I think there it's the execution implementation part and the danger that the system that wants to continue maintaining reparations would love us to sit down and also say, oh, okay, the Rum families in Jamaica and the Rum families in Trinidad and all these, we need to bring them in also and put them on the spot. Everybody knows that in the Caribbean. These are small islands. We all know who's who and who benefited. And I think it's fair to say there's that acceptance. But right now what we're dealing is with the number one issue, what happened first. And people then know, and once we get that settled, yes, we need to then do our own internal family rapprochement, because there are people who run these countries today who are the direct beneficiaries of those who ran them 400 years ago. But if we're going to do both battles at once, Louverture and the generals in Haiti will tell you, then you're not going to defeat Napoleon. And the church is, spirituality, religion, very important. One of the missing links on institutions is we haven't tackled the Roman Catholic Church yet, and we haven't tackled the Anglican Church yet, although the Anglican Church in England has come forth. Many of those plantations were linked to churches in England, and they've come forth through the work of the Reparations Commission. But the big Vatican, that one has not been touched yet, and that's how it all started with Fernando and Isabel. It was the sword in one hand and the Bible in the other. That's how it worked. We need to remember that. So again, we're in a process now where you're building it up and you're planning your strategy as you go along.
Fabulous.
If I may.
We have a question.
Okay, let me,
Oh,
just
go ahead.
if I may. So that's why when you say that, and we need to call it what it is, people don't like to mention those papal bulls that are still in place. Yep. They have not been revoked. And if you still have that in place, it's very difficult to move forward in some of the, not so much the conversation, we can have the dialogue till hell freeze. That was an oxymoron. I didn't mean it like that. Right, but we need to move in that direction of, again, what can we do that's actionable? I just wanted to highlight that the other part that you mentioned about spirituality, it also means that some of us in the room need to be comfortable that not everybody is part of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. And that there's going to be these other expressions. Even when I hear that term Vudun, I know what that means to some people. And we need to remember that that term has a root to just spirit. It has nothing to do with any kind of dark, demonic, obia, anything. It's just spirit. And until we unpack that, sometimes even when we come into a room space, how we dress, what head tie we have on, I'm being very, because I live this. Of course. Right? And it's important that persons catch that. Like I have to explain, I'm not Rastafarian. I respect Rastafari, right? But I'm not a Rastafari. I'm not part of that tradition. And I think that spirituality piece always becomes interwoven in our conversation because it's how I feel you. It's how you feel me, right? So whether we say Ma'at, Ubuntu, balance, harmony, all of that, respect, trust, integrity, equity, we say equity, but are we really engaged in being equitable, right? So it's really important to highlight that. And the disclaimer that I didn't say in the beginning, because I was just excited with everybody's commentary. My father's Quisqueya out of San Pedro de Macorís in República Dominicana. My mother comes from this French Haiti space, right? On the other side of the island, grounded in St. Martin. We were able to go into our family lineage and use all the different 23andMe, Ancestry.com, whatever, and find family on my maternal line in Southeast Africa. That's my other reason reaching out to my sister in Uganda. So it's important so that I may look like, I could sound like, but it's my soul space, my spiritual space that allows me to stay grounded in this reparatory justice, restitution, repatriation. You see where I'm going? Right, so I'm praying that we can really, and I say prayer in action. Don't just talk prayer and do chants, but prayer in action so that we can move this whole actionable, deliverable piece forward. It's been an honor to even share. Whew, I felt that. Whew, that was great. Thank you, my sister.
I'm going to give you 10 seconds because we just need to hold that space for you. Thank you. Where's my person with the mic?
I'm right here.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you. I'm another one of the rebels from St. Croix. A member of the St. Croix Foundation nonprofit consortium. My name is Frandel Gerard. And I think that there's an element to this conversation that we overlook, which is truth and reconciliation, which then will open the journey, I believe, to reparations. Because if we don't speak our truths if we don't know the truth, we do something. I mentioned the day started off with my being quite taken aback, because we need to be very intentional about not using the language of the oppressor as we do this work. So as we look at the 1960s in the United States, and God bless him and the work he did, Brother Martin Luther King Jr., let's know whose shoulders he stood on. Let's know of the African Caribbean men and women who led the early civil rights movements in the early 20th century, who were that first wave of Caribbean migrants, primarily into New York and into Harlem, right? Let's understand that the first black labor union that we all now are saying, what's the name of the African American word saying? That there were men and women from the Caribbean who were the people working on those railroads, who began the organizing to start the Porters Union, right? That Ashley Totten and was one of the principals, a man who grew up in the gravedigger's house in the public cemetery on the western end of the island of St. Croix. A woman named Elizabeth Hendrickson, who formed the first women's union in New York for African American women, who grew up on a little corner of a street in Frederiksted, St. Croix, that was a home for free black people during the time of slavery. That we understand our connections between the diaspora, that there is no African American, right? There are people of African descent in the Americas.
I love it.
That we're all related. And that the Afro-Latino distinction, are we Latino or are we African? Because I remember finding the letter written in 1955 to my father, a man of African Caribbean descent, telling him about his need to come home and take care of his Puerto Rican wife because of the disgrace that she was being told that she had brought upon her Puerto Rican family by having the nerve to marry a black man and then have his child, right? So in our house, those of us of African, Puerto Rican or African Dominicano or African, right? Is it African Puerto Rican or African Latino? Is it African Guatemalan or is it African Latino? What's Latino? Because we know how we treat each other, and we know how we have been treated, and we know that we have to speak our truth before we try to do this huge global change. We gotta clean up our own house. We have to be able to speak with each other with respect and understanding, and that begins with defining using the language very intentionally, so that we understand that we're not perpetuating somebody else's agenda, that we're actually helping to write a new agenda, and to take it to the next level. So as we've been to Denmark. How many of you have been to Denmark? Those people are not happy. But they don't know where their money comes from.
Yeah.
They don't teach about their role in the transatlantic slave trade. Mm-hmm. How many of y'all knew that they had 3 castles on the west coast of Africa? Yep. Right? That they made big money. And on top of it, when they sold the United States, the Virgin Islands of the United States, the black people went with it. The United States paid $25 million for the land and the people because we were not considered civilized. Isn't that the terminology in the territorial stuff? So let's know that when we speak to each other, we make sure that we take the time to learn about each other's experiences so that we're not just grabbing talking points from places that may not have our best interests at heart. Thank you.
The sisters from St. Croix are bringing the truth. Thank you. I feel like this is a really good place for us to wrap up.
One more?
Is it in this vein, or is it a whole other question in the back?
It's about migration as reparations.
I don't know. I have no idea what to do anymore. I've lost control of this.
My name is Gabrielle Eplon. I'm with NYU Law's Global Justice Clinic, and we have a hemispheric network for Haitian migrants' rights. And I want to say thank you for centering and highlighting the reality of Haiti, both from the stage but also from the audience. As a woman of Haitian descent, I just want to thank you for that first and foremost. I'm curious as to your thoughts on Dr. Tendai Achume's argument about migration as reparations. Because one, I think there is often this disconnect between migration justice and racial justice, and I think you've mentioned what Haiti has done, but Haiti also was the first country to offer asylum to those who were enslaved. And looking at that history and then seeing how Haitian migrants are treated throughout the entire hemisphere, Latin America, but also the Caribbean and North America, and to your point, our own people sometimes as well. But I'm very curious as to if what you all are doing on that topic of migration as reparations in general, but also as it pertains to the reality of Haitian migrants. Thank you.
One of the things I would start with is that there are requests and petitions to the International Court of Justice around placement of Africans throughout the diaspora attached to that migratory piece and connecting that to reparatory justice and restitution. So that's like in place. As a matter of fact, it has been already prepared and in planning for submission for this third session of the UN's Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. It's also tied to what's coming forward in the continuation of this International Decade for People of African Descent that most people didn't know about the first one. So it really needs to be a second one so that persons can actually engage in that whole recognition, justice, and development for real this time, because persons are really engaged. There's been a lot of efforts in these different convenings, and the entity I didn't mention, and I should have said that first, the African Jurists, which is a collection of judges, lawyers, etc., out of the African continent, working with legal minds and scholars, etc., throughout the globe, have been working specifically on that particular issue, so that persons are very clear on what forced migration's role is in reparatory justice and so forth. So there's a lot, and those links I can gladly share with everyone because that's already available publicly.
So this has been an amazing conversation. I want to thank our wonderful, incredibly dedicated, esteemed panel. Thank you for educating us, enlightening us, bringing